I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. I got a bombshell for you today. I woke up this morning, and like I do most every morning, I picked up my phone and I checked my messages, saw what happened overnight, and Mark Spatz, UAV Tech on YouTube, posted a freaking bombshell. The Betaflight developers have decided to take 32 kilohertz gyro sampling out of Betaflight 4.0. Betaflight will no longer attempt to support 32 kilohertz gyro sampling. And some of you are like, yeah, I get that. And some of you have the sense that 32K gyro sampling is like a big deal and are confused as to why anyone wouldn't want it. And some of you are convinced that 32 kilohertz is OMG so important and are super annoyed right now and are really glad that you fly Flight 1 or Race Flight or Butterflight, which, yeah. Hey, good news. The Butterflight team will have another important thing to do, right? Butterflight was started when the Butterflight devs disagreed with the Betaflight devs about the importance of Kalman filtering. And they said, screw you, we're making our own firmware. And now they have the chance to do that again, to keep 32K sampling in the Betaflight codebase by rolling it into Butterflight, presumably. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this. What is 32K? Why is it potentially good? Why is it potentially bad or maybe indifferent? And why have the Betaflight devs decided to take it out? What does this mean for us? We got to start this conversation by talking about the Nyquist limit. And the Nyquist limit says that, well, the Shannon-Nyquist theorem says that for any signal composed of various frequencies of data, that to sample and reproduce the signal perfectly, you have to sample at twice the frequency of the highest component in the data. Or to flip that another way, if you're sampling at a given frequency, you can accurately reproduce components of the signal up to 1/2 your sampling rate. This is really fascinating and, for some people who love vinyl records, controversial. But in fact, it is mathematically provable that if you have like an audio file, or if you have a gyro reading from a quadcopter and there's all these different frequencies of data in there, it's mathematically provable that the Nyquist Shannon theorem is true. Half your sampling rate. When frequencies are above half your sampling rate, then you get what's called aliasing, which causes distortion in the data that you're seeing. Based on the Nyquist theorem, we could ask the question, what is the maximum frequency that makes sense to sample in a quadcopter? And in order to do that, we have to ask the question, what is the maximum frequency that we want to actually represent and record? And it turns out that the usable data that we really care about stops at about 80 hertz, let's say. That is the actual motions of the quadcopter, because when the quadcopter is moving, we can think of that motion as having a frequency, even though in reality it's not going up and down like that, right? But if you think about a left roll, well, imagine that left roll was part of a sinusoidal movement and ask what frequency would that be. And it's down closer to 20 hertz, but maybe even as high as 80 hertz. And that would suggest to us that 160 hertz, based on the Nyquist limit, is the max we need to sample. But that's not true, because there's a whole lot of noise. There's a whole lot of vibration at around, say, 350 to 600 hertz coming from the motors. And actually, that's for a 5-inch quad. For a larger quad with larger props, that frequency comes down because the props are spinning slower. And for micros, that frequency can get up as high as like 600 or 800 hertz. So the motor vibration on a quadcopter peaks out around, let's say, under 1,000 hertz. And based on that, our sampling rate would need to be no higher than 2 kilohertz. So then what's the point of sampling faster than 2 kilohertz? To answer that question, we actually have to leave the Nyquist theorem behind. I don't think actually that there is much point of sampling faster than 2 kHz if all you care about is the Nyquist theorem, if all you care about is avoiding aliasing. We can look at the noise plots of our quadcopters and see that there just isn't much energy above 1 kHz, and so there's not much point in sampling above 2 kHz. But there's more going on here than just the Nyquist theorem. And to understand this, we have to think about the internals of the gyro chip that we're using. So the gyro chip that we'll talk about here is the Icm series of gyros, which are capable of sampling at up to 32 kHz. We're going to set aside gyros like the MPU 6000 that only samples up to 8 kHz. All of these gyro chips have built-in low-pass filters. Filtering always introduces latency or delay. And when I talk about this, the first thing that people go to is it's like processing delay. The microprocessor takes some time to run the filter code. No, the processing delay is actually very, it's not nothing, but it's very fast. It can be run basically underneath one PID loop. So if your PID loop is running at 16 kHz, it's 1/16,000th of a second or less, because the filters have to be run once every PID loop. So the filtering delay, the processing, is not what we're concerned with. Filtering delay is an inherent component of running filters. And the way I like to give an example of it is, let's say we're going to do a filter that is a moving 10 sample average. So for every 10 samples we get in, we're going to output the average of those 10 samples. And that's actually a very simple form of low-pass filter, kind of like what they're doing on the gyro data, but that's not what they're doing, but it's kind of like it. So if we're going to do this moving 10 sample average, and I give you the very first sample of gyro data, and I ask you, what's the average of that? Well, there is no 10 sample average yet. You've only got one sample. So now here comes the second sample. Nope. You can see that you're going to have to wait till you get 10 samples of gyro data before you can output the 10 sample average. So when the 11th sample comes in, the average of the 1 through 10th sample can go out. When the 12th sample comes in, the average of the 2 through 11th sample can go out. And you can see that this filter will always have a 10 sample delay between the gyro data being measured and coming in and the filtered gyro data going out. And that's an example of how every filter is going to have delay. And the more you filter, the more delay the filter has. And this is important because the Betaflight devs, at least, have been working towards this conclusion that one of the best things we can do to make our quads fly better is remove delay from the PID loop. And one of the biggest places that delay gets introduced is in filtering. So why don't we just turn the filters off? Well, because the quadcopter motors are so noisy. I don't mean noise like your ears, I mean like vibration. They're so noisy that if we turn the filters off, the quad will fly like crap and we'll smoke motors. So we have to have filtering. So the goal is to get enough filtering that we get rid of the noise, but as little filtering as possible. So let's go back to the gyro chip we were talking about earlier, the Icm Gyro. These gyros have built-in low-pass filters in the hardware, and those low-pass filters add delay. And it turns out that when you put the gyro into 32K sampling mode, one of the things that happens is all of the internal low passes get turned off. All of them, there might be one left. Basically, a whole lot of delay is removed. Mark Spatz says that it's about 0.88 milliseconds, and that's a substantial amount. Significant improvements in prop wash handling have been detected when the delay of the filters is reduced from, let's say, 4 milliseconds to 2 milliseconds. And there is a whole side conversation we could go into as to, like, how could it possibly matter if there's an extra 2 milliseconds of delay? The motors can't spin that fast, yada, yada, yada. The fact is that the reduction in filter delay has empirically been shown to significantly improve prop wash handling and other aspects of handling. So we want to get that delay as low as possible. But here is the problem that has led the Betaflight devs to make this decision. When you remove that low-pass filter, you get a lot less delay, but you also get a lot more noise. And as a result, you then have to add filters back in. Instead of the filters being in the gyro chip, they're in Betaflight. It's the notch filters. It's the gyro low pass 2. It's the D-term low pass 2. And by the time you add those filters back in and bring the noise level down to an acceptable level for flight, you got all the delay back. But so is it a break even then? You're running 32 kilohertz. Maybe that's good for something else. Well, a lot of times you end up with more delay. It's better. You get less delay by just using the built-in gyro filter in the ICM chip and using 8K sampling. But there's more to it than that. This is a black box log of a CL Racing F7 in 8K mode and in 32K mode. And you can see that in 32K mode, look how much more noise there is on the roll axis than in 8K mode. This is not a case of, well, we increased the sampling rate, so the Nyquist frequency went up, so we were able to capture more noise that was being overlooked or aliased out before. There's no noise at 4 kilohertz, at 8 kilohertz. Increasing the sampling rate did not reveal more noise that was there. Increasing the sampling rate revealed a deficiency of the ICM gyro, where when it's run in 32K mode, it's just making all this garbage data. But this graph is even more telling. This graph is of a board with dual gyro sensor fusion. And what that means is that there are two of the exact same gyro on the board oriented at 90 degrees to each other. And basically what we should see is that these two gyros produce approximately the same result for a given set of scenarios. And what we actually see is that when run in 32K mode, sometimes, and this is on the roll axis here, as we saw before, the roll axis was having problems in the last one. Sometimes the two gyros dramatically diverge. Right here, where the one gyro is measuring whatever, negative 10 degrees per second, and the one gyro is measuring negative 30 degrees per second, that's a problem. That's just bogus garbage data that the gyro is spitting out. Whereas when run in 8K mode, the gyros very closely correspond to each other. In other words, what the Betaflight devs are discovering is that the ICM gyros, when run in 32K mode, often produce garbage data. So, the conclusion. There is a debatable benefit of running in 32K mode. Although 32K mode does decrease latency, it also increases noise, and you have to make up the difference with additional filtering, which then negates the advantage often of the improved latency. But more importantly, the ICM gyros often produce garbage data when run in 32K mode. More noise, specifically like on one axis, but not the other two axes for no apparent reason. And this is why so many pilots, and myself included, run 8K, and I do this even on chips that are capable of running at 32K. My experience has been that when you run on 32K, sometimes it's fine, and sometimes it's noisy, and you get yaw twitches and hot motors for no freaking reason. And then you'll take the exact same flight controller and you'll swap it out. You'll just put a different one in, and suddenly it's fine. Because of the inconsistency of the 32K gyros, I just run 8K on all my quads, and they all run great. The number one thing I do to improve performance on my quads is raise the gyro low-pass filter. The default Betaflight gyro low-pass filter is, I think it's 110 hertz, and if you have a clean setup, if you have a stiff frame and your motors aren't crazy banged up and dirty, I've raised it as high as 150 or 160 hertz, and I get cool motors. Everything is fine. I don't smoke. Be careful if you do this, because you can smoke a motor. That's why the default is as low as it is. But I significantly improve the latency of my filtering setup and my prop wash handling and so forth just by increasing those filters, and everything is great even at 8 kilohertz. And if you don't believe me, you can go look at this video on my channel, FPV Freestyle Trick Practice with Stick Cam. This is my quote-unquote my perfect build quadcopter, the Armantan Chameleon TI with the JB2407 motors and the Holy Bro Kakute F7 flight controller. It's running in 8 kilohertz, and all I've done is increase the low-pass filters. I didn't even PID tune it. And if you want to confirm that for yourself, you can go to this video, JB's Perfect Freestyle Quadcopter, and in the video description, I have linked to my full configuration dump for this build, and you can see for yourself what I did with the filters and PIDs and confirm it for yourself. And this video is 15 minutes of flight at 50% speed, you can see every stick movement and hear every possible prop wash oscillation. I think you'll agree this quadcopter is flying great. And that brings us to the conclusion, which is that if the quadcopters are flying great at 8 kilohertz and 32K adds all this uncertainty where some flight controllers fly terrible, rather than just bang your head against the wall of trying to solve that problem, just drop down to 8 kilohertz and make them fly great and get on with your life. And some people are testing even lower. The new Betaflight RPM filter, where Betaflight gets the RPM of the motor directly from the ESC in real time and targets the filter at that RPM, that filter is running at 4K, and people are saying, oh my God, this is the best improvement I've ever felt since damped light. So maybe even lower. Hey, we'll all end up down at 1 kilohertz like KISS has been at for a long time. Way to go, KISS, as usual. Ahead of the game. Now, I know this is going to be a controversial decision because there are also people out there who feel that 32 kilohertz is the way and the light, most notably Flight 1 and Butterflight and Raceflight fans. And there's no doubt that Flight 1 flies amazing. There is no doubt that some people put Butterflight on their quads and it fixes problems that they could not fix any other way. These things are facts and they are true. But here's what I want to throw at you. You look at what guys like Mark Spatz and the Betaflight devs are doing, and at the end of the day, Mark has published all of his data for all this testing he's doing. He's published it on a public website. You can download the data if you are so inclined, and you can test it. You can poke holes in it. And that's one of the reasons why the Betaflight project appeals to me so much, is because it is completely open source, and not just the code that they produce, but also the data that backs up the decisions that go into the code is entirely public. The Flight 1 devs say that 32 kilohertz is key to what they do. Kalen Dorr, the Raceflight dev, says that 32 kilohertz and Kalman filtering is essential to why they fly so good. But we don't have any ability to see whether that's true or not. We just have to take their word for it. And I'm skeptical of that. I'm skeptical. Skeptical is the right word. I don't disbelieve it. I'm just skeptical because I can't prove or disprove it. There's more that's going on in Flight 1 sim mode than just 32 kilohertz sampling and maybe Kalman filtering. People have, off the record, told me some of the things they think are going on. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's more than just 32K. But they focus on 32 kilohertz sampling, number one, because it's a divisive issue and it's an issue they care a lot about, but also it helps from a marketing standpoint to say, we're doing this thing that no one else is doing, and this is incredibly important. And that's, at the end of the day, if you're not producing publicly available data for peer review, then it's just marketing. So there you go. Please, before you fill the comments up, please note that I agree that Flight 1 and Raceflight fly amazing. I'm just saying the reason they fly amazing, we can't know for sure whether that's because they're using 32K sampling or because there's something else that's going on under the hood. We can't know because we can't see and examine the code and test the data. That's all. Okay, that is going to do it for today's video. Holy crap, Betaflight is getting rid of 32K mode. And I drove by the RPM filter. I'm working on putting a quad together. The RPM filter can only run on like 5 different flight controllers right now. I'm working on putting a quad together that can test it because I've been hearing from people about how freaking good it is, even though it only runs at 4 kilohertz. Looking forward to showing you guys that. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to Mark Spatz. Mark is the guy who really deserves credit for publicizing this stuff. I am just sort of standing on the shoulders of greatness there. He made this Facebook post this morning, and I thought I got to get the word out about this, but he's really the guy. So check him out, UAV Tech on YouTube. He is super nerdy. I mean that in the best possible way, Mark. Super nerdy and super technical when it comes to the filters, and he is so locked in with the Betaflight devs about all the testing that they're doing. So if you really love that stuff, definitely check out his channel, UAV Tech on YouTube. Happy flying, everybody.